Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining us today with Sales Hacker. I am super excited. This is certainly one of my favorite people to speak with. I've had the pleasure of speaking with him a couple of times. I know many people know him and love him, and we all follow his books and his blogs. So today we're going to be talking about creating a predictable and scalable revenue and how to triple your growth. So Aaron Ross, welcome to Sales Hacker. We are very excited to have you.
All right. Well, thanks, Richard. I'm happy to be here, and thank you for the warm and a bit embarrassing introduction.
Oh yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I don't mean to embarrass, but it's like, you know, it's kind of like you're our celebrity. Like, you're kind of like the Neil Young to Pearl Jam, right? You're the original Sales Hacker from back in the day. So I hope we didn't age ourselves in that one. Sorry. Just so you know, we are going to be recording this session for everybody. Also, please ask questions as we go along. Aaron loves an interactive audience, as you know we do too. So please go into the question and make a question in the question comment. If you want to go into the chat feature and introduce yourself, feel free to do that as well. We'd love to hear that. I want to give people a little bit of a background on Aaron. If you didn't know, he is the author of, his latest book is called From Impossible to Inevitable and Predictable Revenue, which is the sales Bible of Silicon Valley, right? I think we've all read it about 15 times and highlighted and marketed and posted it on a regular basis. For those of you who don't know, Aaron is married with 9 kids, mostly are through adoption. He is what I call one of the good guys out there, really trying to make the world a better place, aside from just business, but in life as well. He's also a big avid fan of motorcycles, and has somehow through all this managed to keep a 25-hour work week, which I hope is going to be a book coming from you soon, Aaron. So
at some point, I can't even work that much these days with all the kids. If I wanted to work more that much, I couldn't.
Great. No, we understand. We understand. I've got 2 kids, and I don't even know how you do it. So he's also the co-founder of Predictable Revenue, the Outbound success company. So if you're ever looking for that, for more of Aaron than just what's in the books, then by all means you should connect with him there as well. So Aaron, I want to start out today very quickly. I want to jump right in. Right, one of the first things that you talk about in your books is you got to nail your niche. Right, like that's the most important thing before you even think about doing any kind of outbound prospecting. Can you talk about what that means? And you've worked with companies of all sizes, right? So can you share a little bit more about the nail your niche philosophy?
Yeah. All right. So, well, the story. So what's interesting is, and that last slide here about the book I did with Jason Lemkin, the other one called From Impossible to Inevitable. So it's related to that because the whole first part of that book is the section's called Nail a Niche, or Niche if you're in Canada. And that book, Predictable Revenue came out 6 years ago, and I learned a lot in those 6 years. And working with companies, or whether people emailed me for advice, or their consulting clients, or friends, who knows what, but I saw people trying to do outbound or trying to grow, and there's lots of reasons why people struggle to grow, but the most common one that I saw and Jason saw was this: you hadn't nailed a niche. So that became the first part of this book, which is really like a growth Bible. So what does that mean? Now, okay, product market fit is a term everyone hears, but when I hear, it's similar, but let me just explain. When I hear product market fit often feels like, oh, there's this one-time thing. You get your product market fit and then you're done. So let's just put that aside for a moment. What I see is there are companies who go through these transitional phases. So you start a company and you get your first customers or investors or partners or media mentions really through your relationships and networks, as you should. That's the easiest place to start for most people, assuming you actually know anyone. So most people get a company to, and it's not easy, but you get it to a few 100,000 and maybe $1 million or a few million or maybe even up to 10 million. But there's that range of 1 to 10 million where a lot of companies, at least SaaS companies, plateau. That actually could be lower for services companies, but there you hit this plateau. So you get to a certain level through relationships, word of mouth, could be including customer referrals. You grow and then you sort of plateau. And then in order to grow, so remember the predictable revenue book, there's the hot coals picture. So there's, you sort of do this, and then there's these hot coals to get to predictable growth. So here's the thing. In order for outbound prospecting to work, in order for marketing to work when you're reaching out to people who don't know you, right, versus marketing to people finding you. So it's called cold lead generation, which is important. If you want to grow beyond your pool of people, right, beyond your word of mouth, and maybe you have inbound working, maybe not. But there's this thing that happened where companies would become dependent on word of mouth, right? People come to them, and it didn't, because they used it to get off the ground, but then it became a crutch. And so they get to 4 million, 5 million, and they couldn't grow because they didn't know how to really tune their targeting and their messaging and what they did to speak to people who didn't know them at all, where there was no brand relationship, there's no prior trust. So there's this we call it this arc of attention. So on one side, when people know you, even if they've heard of you, you as a person, your company, your brand, or there's some referral, I mean, they might be willing to give you a half hour or hour of their time to explore the fit. What do you do? Whether, again, consulting a product, like maybe just go through a demo. Let's go and let's talk about it. Let's find a problem. I'll tell you my pains. We can have a conversation, right? And that's really, in the scheme of things, easy. Nothing's easy, but it's easy compared to when you're ready to grow and you need to reach out to people who don't know you, where there's zero trust. There's no brand for you or your company yet, and they won't give you a half hour or an hour. They might give you half a second on email, or 10 seconds or 20 seconds on the phone. And there's that huge gap. So how do you go from sort of being used to being able to explain yourself, to be able to do a 2-minute elevator pitch, to you can't do that. You have to get people's attention in like a tiny slice of time. So that really is the essence of what you were trying to nail a niche. Who's the right target who needs you? What do they care about? What are you offering them? So they actually are interested in starting a conversation with you.
So when you talk about that, so let's say you're in that 5 to 10 million range, right? We think we have some level of product market fit. We've at least created some run rate. Or what you're saying is then you have to kind of take a step back and look at who your current customers are and not necessarily pigeonhole yourself, but at least go, okay, of our 5 million, 25% or 22% are from this vertical, or they're this type of title. And then you try to go after everybody else in that. Is that what you're talking about, really trying to nail it? Or are you talking about something different than that?
So let me give you an example. There's a healthcare company. They're in the healthcare space. They don't deliver healthcare, but they sell, it's basically like a financial service to hospitals. And when they have like a $20 million company. And by the way, this is a problem that big companies, it's really this, there's so many options out there. How do you focus in on the right people who need you with the right product, the right message? So again, SAP has this problem because they have so many products to offer. But startups or smaller companies have the more common problem, like you said, is there's lots of companies who could use them. So how do you focus in this healthcare company, decide, okay, of all the hospital systems and doctors' offices, all the types of practices that we have as customers, and we might have 500 customers, when we are going to do outbound, and again, the principle applies to any kind of lead generation effort, but for outbound, instead of these 10 types of customers, we're really the place where we have the biggest deals and the most need, where we're in need, not a nice to have, are hospitals with at least 50 million in outstanding collections that can't be collected, right? Big number. We got to really focus, because it's not about thinking small, it's about being focused. And instead of asking them about, hey, who handles your collections? Really, the way they think is they talk about ZBA, like zero balance accounts. Or instead of who handles your outstanding, your receivables, or your, let's call it like generic terms. they would ask, but they had like sort of that inside language, like who handles denials management or ZBA. So it's sort of that it's the who's the very specific type of customer who needs you most. How do they think? What are the terms they use in their everyday life, and it's running around their head, so that when you're reaching out to them, you're really trying to minimize the mental translation they're doing, the mental work they're doing to look at your stuff and say, is this a fit or not? I can't really tell. And try to make it obvious to them that this is relevant or it's not. Because
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just in the world of like more email, more messaging, more overwhelm, people have less attention. They have less and less energy to interpret your things. So the easier you can make it for them, again, whether it's a Facebook ad or an email or a phone call, whatever it is, for them to say, make anything like really easy to understand and simple to act on.
So just sort of translating and breaking it down a little bit, it sounds like you're saying you do have to go back to, and you and I talked about this in the prep of, the ideal customer profile, right? We're tired of that word a little bit, but you do have to sort of know who you're going to go after, but then focus on the content as it relates to that person's title or role within that particular profile.
Yeah, so for example, and I really would encourage people to get that free chapter that goes into detail on this, and also a couple sample matrix exercises. I'll describe them briefly here. So to me, and when we do work with companies, so nail a niche means of all the types of opportunities you have, big companies, small companies, channel partners, hospitals versus finance, New York versus California, you could have, if you think about it, lots of sub-ideal customer profiles. We're trying to say, all right, what type of customer should you go after in the first place? Because you really have, it's almost like, what campaign should you focus on? Because you could do, as a company, you might be able to target this many people as a company with inbound marketing or word of mouth. But when you're doing outbound or specific kinds of lead generation, you want to be more laser pointed, like a very specific type, like much more targeted. And that's really where people go wrong. Again, let's do outbound because that's most of my experience, but they try to target too many types of customers with too generic language and too many geographies and so on. So really being focused on, of these types of companies, which one or two are the main to start with, and then you detail those out with an ideal customer profile. Now, in the chapter, there's a matrix that lays out sort of, if I drew this, in the columns, there's what's the use case, right? And you might say, again, let's go back to healthcare collections issues, right? The outstanding payments are too high. They can't collect money. Then who's the power person? Now I'm probably going to miss, there's like 8 columns, but so who's the person? So, because it's not about a company, because there's individual people who are doing this, right? So at a hospital, there might be could be a CFO at one level, a director of denials management, and so on. And each of those people, then the next column is, what are the specific pains to that person, that one person, not the business, to that one person? And then there's a couple other steps. But one of the other important points here, as you go through, and you could do this pretty simply with a whiteboard in 20 minutes with your most experienced people who are selling. But at the end, too, we always say, look, that's all theory. Now go and talk to them. Go do a couple interviews per person, because you want to validate what you think they're thinking. And you want to go find out some of those insider terms, insider keywords and key phrases that you can use. First of all, so your people, whether they're salespeople, SDRs, or marketing people, can really understand how your prospects and customers think. Right? Empathy is probably the number one. I don't know. It's like, it's a key. I don't call it a skill, a key practice in marketing, because you have to be able to put yourself in people's shoes. And interviews and going to talk to them is really like, yeah, you should talk to your internal salespeople and read the PowerPoints, but there's no replacement for going out and meeting with or talking to real prospects, real customers, and really hearing how they think and getting to know them. And that will make any investment in time, like for new prospectors, like get them out and either talking to live customers, at least by phone, but if you can get them in person, even better. So they just have that, they just know it better. They can feel it better, and they'll be better on the phone and email and targeting anything else.
Yeah, no, I talk about this a lot in the companies we work with, where we break it down, like you said, by the title or their role, depending. regardless of the company. And then we talk about, well, what's their pain? Why do they want to solve that pain? And how is solving that pain going to help them? Because talking about why they have that pain and why they need to solve it is a much more interesting conversation than, well, what pain do they have? Right? If they got a collection problem, that, reps will often say, oh, you have a problem with collections, you're in healthcare? Great, we have your solution. And then it just goes into a feature benefit pitch, which is not what we're trying to do these days. So I totally appreciate where you're coming from. We had a question from the audience about how do you know when or go about going after a new niche, right?
Yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah. No, go ahead.
I cut you off. Yeah. So, almost always in business or life, you want to focus on where you're strong first. There are exceptions, but and I probably break that rule all the time. But so, for example, again, an early stage company, or even so whenever we do this, again, whether it was like with SAP, and again, their problem is the same thing. But if they're targeting, so a division's targeting financial services banks of $1 billion, but their problem is a salesperson has 20 products to offer. So where do I start? It's the same problem, just a bit different version of a startup that has, well, we have this horizontal platform. We have a company that does, sort of workflow design tools, like form tools, and government can use it, schools can use it, like anyone can use it. So it's a really hard problem. Where do you start? Because it's much harder to nail a niche with Outbound that way when it's too general. So it's really about picking one or two, like a small number. And if you have 3 prospects, and part it depends on how your resources, because if you have 3 prospectors, you could do one sort of niche per prospector. But the point is usually you want to do like 1 or 2. 1, just if you really need to focus on one thing and just do it well, or 2 to sort of compare and contrast. But you don't want to do, you just really got to make sure you stick to that thing and get it working, doing it well, and having underway where you feel like there's some understanding, there's some progress and some results before you start to divert your resources into this thing. Because you want adding another niche to be complementary, not distracting. And there's no magic solution as to when that is, but I think people are it's more common that companies start off trying to target too many niches, too many types of customers. Like that's the common problem. It's very rare that people are too focused, and we're not getting into enough other niches.
Yep. I had that experience when I was with Mashery. We focused on 4 very specific targets, and it kind of frustrated some of our reps because they're like, well, we should go after financial services, or healthcare was actually another one, right? This was the APIs back in 2011, I think, right around the time your book came out. And we had to, it was really hard to stay focused on that one piece. And you have to make sure you know what you're going to do. You can't just sort of do it because you feel like it. Sometimes I see people, the mistake I see people make is like, oh, we've done all we can with all that, so let's go find something new because something's new and exciting. And they really haven't done all they can with all that,
Yeah. Like if Salesforce hasn't done all they can do with Salesforce automation, then yeah. Well, you're right. Yeah. And I think it helps to talk about some of the reasons people overextend themselves and scatter themselves. Again, probably speaking from experience where when people think, oh, I'm going to focus on one type of customer. Now, again, this could be for your company or it could be for a specific kind of lead generation campaign like Outbound. I'm not saying that as a company you need to focus your whole company in one area, which sometimes you do, but at a minimum, if you're doing outbound or inbound or some kind of specific lead generation, and then you need to like really focus that. So one other thing too in this nail and niche area, I think one of the simplest ideas, and I mentioned it in passing, but it's really discerning. You as a company and product are not a need to have, and you as a company and product are not a nice to have. It's when are you most needed, and how's that different when you're a nice to have? Because when you're a nice to have, people won't buy. Right? They got too many other things to do. So here's how you know if you're a nice to have in SaaS. People take the demo, they're like, oh, that's cool, and they don't buy. Right? Because it's not a need to have. Need to have means because it takes a lot of work usually for them to, go through the demo and like, how am I going to roll this out? How am I going to buy for it? And I'm already busy, and So unless it's a need to have, they're not going to have the energy and the commitment and the need to push through all those challenges to buy it. And if it's a nice to have, it's cool, but it gets dropped, when higher priorities come up.
Yeah. So I had a couple more questions come up, and then we'll move on to specialization,
Yeah.
which I know is the next topic. How granular do you make that niche?
I'm going to say as granular as you need to. You can't make it too granular, because you can always expand it. If it works, you can always expand it. And you start where you start, and if it's not working, you might go more specific. Like if you're targeting law firms, again, a lot of markets, the geography can matter, right? Because companies in New York and the attitude and culture there is different than in Iowa. It's different than California. So let's say you might be, hey, we're doing law firms. Okay, well, big ones or small ones? Right, let's start, small ones. Okay, that's not working. All right, maybe by state could make sense, or by practice, or there's so many ways to slice or to peel the onion.
Right.
But you can't start too specific. The worst thing is you're targeting the law firms with at least 10 lawyers in just Los Angeles, and it works, and then you go to more cities. So you can't be too specific.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I would remind people too is that failure is good. If you pick a niche and it doesn't work, well, that's good information to have, so you can move on to the next one, right? And figure out what the next thing.
Right, use it. Yeah, as long as you learn something, it's not a waste.
Right. Yeah.
One
more question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The sort of weird paradox in life is if you waste a year of your time, it's not really wasted if you learn something from that. So I don't know. It's like a bit of a paradox.
Yeah. How long would you spend as you work with clients? Like, and again, it's going to be different with SAPs of the world versus, a smaller, 100-person SaaS startup. How long would you go focusing on something before you decide it doesn't work? Is it 15 messages to 500 potential prospects? Like, can you do that, or is that too hard to be so specific?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And I think that was one of the things so we do work mostly with smaller companies of like 1 to a few tens of millions. And in these kinds of projects, whether we're prospecting for them or whether we're helping them build their own internal team, what I've seen, and again, I've done this a long time, I've seen pretty much everything that works that doesn't, is if you do it for 3 months and nothing works, that doesn't mean anything. I've seen companies do prospect for 3 to 6 months and really struggle and get almost zero results, but there's the two most common reasons why they might get very little nothing is either the wrong people, or they might be missing. So it could be, again, the prospectors are the wrong prospectors because they're not the proactive ones who are going to use their brains and really, they're not builders, they're growers, right? Or maybe you're missing the right manager. Sometimes you need a manager, sometimes you don't. I've seen a company struggle for 4 months. The prospectors are doing all the right things. It wasn't clicking, and they needed that day-to-day coaching from a manager. So that's one. That's one. The other one is the niche issue, right? Wrong market. Not really. The messaging isn't tight. Like, I can't tell you how many companies have said, okay, they're like, our emails aren't working. Okay. Let's go back to, have you done sort of the niche exercises? Have you done interviews? Have you tried mapping calls? And they haven't done the work, right? They haven't done the work to really understand their niche and to target. And I mean, my lead coach yesterday said there was a company that had gone through like 3 teams, and the manager said, when we started out, that nail and niche stuff I just thought was crap, but now after they've basically like 3 teams, like, I think there was something to that.
Yeah.
Sometimes like.
Here's a good question, because this is a little bit of a chicken and an egg situation, right? And then I promise you the sales specialization.
Yeah, let me finish. So, sorry, it's 4 to 12. So usually it takes 4 to 12 months to get an outbound program up and running and really working. And that can be affected mostly by niche, but it can be by product, or services, etc. If it's not working after a year, there's something wrong. So 2 months doesn't tell you anything. 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, you can still do a lot of things wrong in 6 months and it's not throwaway, but after, you should have something working by 6, definitely by 9. At 12, Like you need someone else to come, something else is wrong. You're
Yep.
just not doing it right.
Yeah.
Probably like 6, but I don't know. Sometimes just people, I don't know. So, but 6 to 12 is the range where you need to have someone, you're doing something wrong if you're not getting something clicking.
Yep. No, I get it. I get it. So this is an interesting question, and I think this might be part of the challenge that people run into is how do you build the message when you're still trying to figure out whether their prospects are truly the right targets, right? Do you stay humble and ask? We're sort of going back to almost creating the niche. We're kind of going a little bit backwards in the conversation. Do you ask for feedback along the way? Like, how do you do that?
It's just a lot of trial and error where, and I don't feel like feedback, I would say feedback, you might do interviews. I like interviews. I think they're something that aren't used nearly enough. And just having, even if you already nailed your niche, new hires should be talking to, whether you call it an interview or not, they should talk to customers and prospects directly just to get that knowledge. Like too many, especially in sales, too many salespeople are trained with PowerPoint and like calling leads, right? They're not like in the field in a way. So I think, sorry, I lost track of the question actually. I got sidetracked by myself.
So the question was how do you measure the message, make sure you're crafting the right message, but you're also still trying to figure out if it's the right people to be talking. And those two things really, in my opinion, they're kind of the same thing.
Yeah, it's
right?
a bit of chicken and egg.
You're perfecting both along the way.
Yeah. This is where it does. Yeah, this is where it does help if you're targeting. It could be two niches, or again, it could be two complementary ones, or if you have two prospectors. This is a nice thing. If you're doing outbound, if you're building it from scratch, it's nice if you can do two prospectors, because then you can compare and contrast how they're doing. If they're getting or not getting results, is that the niche and process, or is that the person? Sometimes you can't afford to. It's nice when you can. 2 or 3 is like the ideal, number to start with. But it's a bit of a chicken and egg. You're trying, you're experimenting, you're seeing what works, and you're really, especially people who are there who know your customers. Or at least if you have an expert there in outbound, you're just trying to observe, and through experience, you're just gauging, what should we do next, and at what point do you say, yeah, this isn't working.
Yeah, no, there's tremendous value in saying, hey, there's tremendous value, and I love what you said about an interview versus feedback, right? It's kind of the same thing, but people are apt to give you more time if you ask for an interview than feedback. Like if you say, hey, I'd love to just interview you for 5 or 10 minutes. We're trying to figure out how we fit in the marketplace. We'd love to rely on your expertise. An interview makes someone feel special. Feedback means, well, anybody can give you feedback, but I want to interview you.
Yeah. Give me feedback on what, for what.
Yeah. So, let's move forward. And by the way, to everybody who asked those questions, thank you so much. Those are great.
Yeah.
Sales specialization. Yeah, please do. Sales specialization. This was like one of the biggest things that I remember talking about or reading about in your book about, this is when the SDR really birthed itself in sort of the new generation of sales. I know they've kind of been around for a while, but your approach on that, what's different between when you wrote this book 11 years or in 2011 versus now in specialization?
Well, okay, so what's different? So specialization, what this means is, right, it's like a sports team. I don't know of any sports teams where you have 10 people on the field and they're all just doing everything. You've got forwards, you've got defenders, you've got goalies, you've got whatever. And now I'm assuming a lot of people in this audience understand specialization because you're in Sales Hacker, and you've got prospectors who prospect, closers who close, account managers or whatever you want to call post-sale, could be inbound lead responders. That actually is I think it might be taken for granted now in Silicon Valley that that's just the way you do it, and lots of people have never known a different way, but that's still the exception in the world. Most sales teams in the world still have salespeople that do everything, where they prospect for themselves, they close for themselves, and they might manage customers themselves too, and maybe even get their own, deal with their own leads. That's still, so one thing that's changed is that in Silicon Valley and sort of the entrepreneurial areas, specialization is more of a default. What hasn't changed is that hasn't changed around the world very much yet. But now one thing is specialization, a lot of people get parts of it wrong, I think. So for example, a lot of companies still mix when they shouldn't. And there's always exceptions to every rule. Like in specialization, again, in the new book, I update this. And Jason and I say, for example, if you have, like, if you're sending B2C, if it's a really simple sales cycle, like a 1 or 2 or 3 calls, there's some situations you may not specialize. But ultimately, the principle is focus, and you want to apply it to your business and team in a way that makes sense. And one place people don't do that enough is there's still too many companies in Silicon Valley or other places where they have the SDRs do both inbound and outbound, right? And that just doesn't work. There are short-term reasons you might do that. For example, if in the beginning, right, you only have one person, or you are doing a bit of experiment where you have one person doing everything so they can learn everything so they can better understand how to divvy it up. But besides those certain situations, like special situations, inbound needs to be separate from outbound. Because inbound has a different rhythm than outbound. Inbound has, it's like an hourly, daily metronome, right, where people want fast responses. If you let a lead sit for a day or an hour, you just need to be ready to respond. Outbound has more of like a week to weeks rhythm, right? It takes 2 to 4 weeks for most, to go from a cold account to an accepted opportunity. And those rhythms just don't mesh for people. I don't know, it's just too hard for people to juggle these different rhythms, which is why it's too hard for salespeople to juggle all these different things, the leads and the prospecting, closing, and so on. That's one place people go wrong. Another, I think, one more is that people might follow it too religiously. I need prospectors and closers, and they don't, again, sit back and think, all right, for our business, where we are today, are these roles the right ones, or do we need to adapt this a bit? Right? So we have a small business unit that really should just have one team of people that are doing the inbound and closing and no prospecting. So in the From Impossible book, there's a case study on a company called Clio, which is a fast-growing Canadian company that sells to law firms. And what they did is, there's a prospecting team and a closing team for the bigger law firms. And for the small law firms that come in through inbound leads, they respond to the leads and close them. Right? So again, if the principle is focus, how do you have people doing fewer things better?
So question, I see this as an interesting debate, is that companies will often have their new reps be inbound and their senior reps be outbound. I actually kind of believe it's the opposite. If it's an inbound and it's a good lead, you don't want your newest rep there talking to them. Do you have any philosophy, or what have you seen work in the market? Mine's a theory, so you've seen more of it than I have. So what do you think?
Yeah, no, again, usually the inbound is the junior role because it's easier to do for a lot of reasons. And outbound is harder to do. It's a promotion. The reasons that might be different, again, is if you only have like one inbound person and all your revenue is coming into that person, and it's not like a simple product sale. It's more like, for us, we don't really have a simple product. We do services. It's outbound prospecting for companies and coaching. It's like I coach companies on how to build their own team too, and sometimes that mixes. So it's a little bit more of a bit more complex than just a product. So we have, for us, we'd have our more experienced person on inbound for now, and but for product companies, the default is inbound is more junior, it's easier to learn, and then outbound is more senior. Because it's harder.
Yep. Yeah, that's really good insight. So a couple more questions coming from the audience. So this one's coming from Bryant. We've hired a marketing response rep and a lead scoring rep. When do they hand off the accounts to the account rep, right? So it's all about, when does that handoff occur, right? When does it convert?
A lead scoring rep?
Yeah. I'm assuming, and Brian, we'll have to make some assumptions that means someone who's trying to figure out, do they fit the profile, right? It is the right person. It is the right time. I don't know if there's a conversation there. Brian's telling me it's correct. So maybe they're having a conversation or not, right? But when do you transition from your SDR to your AE?
Yeah, well, so here's the rule of thumb that I always found to be successful is you want that call to be worth the AE's time. So this is the rule of thumb. What that means is the AE gets it, and even if they have a call or they're need to set up a call and it's feels like it's worth it to them, so they're going to put the energy in to follow up on it and do it. What does that look like? So, some companies want, things like budget, BANT, budget authority, need timing, all defined at the very beginning before it goes to a salesperson. Right? And there's reasons for that depending on the market. If it's a bit more of a mature market. But that might be the wrong approach if you're in an emerging market where there's no budget line item. So having a budget conversation with someone where there's no budget yet doesn't make sense. So the qualification criteria for other companies for creating a space can be different, not as concrete. There might just be authority and need. So it's not about having that exact qualification. It's, okay, at that point, does an experienced salesperson feel like, yeah, that was worth my time. There might not have been an opportunity, but I should have talked to them. Or that was an opportunity, yet now I'm going to take it. What you don't want is, why did you set this up for me? That's how you know you're not at the right space. Now, one more rule of thumb would be, again, depends a bit on the market and your close rates and so on, but if you set up 10 appointments for a salesperson, you want to track how many of those turn into accepted opportunities. There's not a magic number, because if you're in a custom services area, you might only get 1 or 2 out of 10 turn into opportunities if it's like a needle in a haystack kind of niche. But if you're in SaaS, or productized, you probably want 50 to 75%, 50 to 80%, 70 to 80% of those appointments for salespeople to end up being accepted by them. So that's a bit of a quality metric where they're getting enough quality, which is out of 10 appointments, if I show up to half of them and it's a waste of my time, I'm going to start thinking less. When I get an appointment from you, I'm like, am I going to be excited for it? Am I going to be like, eh? And you want them to be excited, because if they're not going to work it. They're not going to follow up. They're not going to be diligent. And one of the missing pieces from the specialization commonly is the going back to that. You really need, so for at least outbound prospecting, you can't, prospector really should not support more than 4 or 5 salespeople, because that relationship between them and the salespeople would be too diluted. It's that relationship for success of that team. It's not quite as important for inbound lead responders, because, again, theoretically, it's still important, but not as important, because the lead should be already interested to some extent. It's a bit more of like you set up, you pre-qual, and you set them up. So it is important, but it's vital for the prospectors and salespeople. That relationship, they know each other, they know their styles, they know what they're working on, they know their targeting, and they know their quirks and requirements.
And I think it also depends, to your point, if you're an early stage company, you actually do want that feedback from the AE to say, well, these aren't working because, right? And so there needs to be an SLA between your SDR or BDR, whatever you call them, and your account rep, that they're going to have a weekly cadence to talk about what's working, right?
Yeah,
and if the AE doesn't want, and if the AE doesn't want to do it, well, then you got, as you said earlier, it could be a personnel problem in some cases, right?
Yeah. Well,
so
look, sometimes
that happens a lot.
Yeah, sometimes you just get a dud as an AE. I don't know why, but there are just AEs who just don't engage, or they just don't, use their SDRs well. It just doesn't click for them. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
We're getting a ton of more questions, but I want to ask 1 or 2 more, and then I want to talk about in sales specialization around sales enablement, right? Like that's the big word these days. 2017 has been the discussion of sales enablement, but and maybe we can tie these in. One of the questions that's coming from the audience is, if they're early stage, do you hire an SDR first or an ISR first? Do you hire someone to do lead generation, or do you want an actual closer who's going to, maybe, it sounds like they're saying they may have to do some of their own prospecting. Any experience around which comes first, or is that still a chicken and egg?
Yeah, so a bit of it depends on what you can afford and also who you can find. So, for example, if you can find a salesperson who is willing to prospect, and they are the builder type, right? There's builders and growers. Builders can help. They like to build things and systems and figure it out. Growers are good once it's defined, and they just need to turn the crank. I'm a builder, so again, once something's built, it's working, it gets a bit boring. but other people aren't good about like figuring it out. So usually, I think it's hard to find you can find them. This is where a bit depends on who you can find. You can find salespeople who are willing to jump in and prospect and help figure that out for a while until they build in a pipeline where they can sell. And then you can go back and try to find a prospector. It's often easier to find a prospect. So usually here's sort of like the least risky path, especially your early stage, because a lot of early stage companies and entrepreneurs don't know how to hire salespeople, which is why so many first salespeople fail and fall out. Just like I wouldn't know how to hire a coder. I would have no idea. It's like a crapshoot. So the least risky way to do it is to, if you're let's say that you're a CEO, you're the only person selling, right? So that you hire a junior, an SDR, right? If you have a lot of inbound leads, they can handle those. If you don't, they can prospect. But they're your appointment setter for the CEO, right? You get that defined. You build some pipeline, and then you hire that ISR, so it's a much less risky way to approach it than trying to hire a salesperson from the start. Because usually you just hire the wrong, you don't really know how to do it, you hire the wrong person, there's no leads, and just they leave. So that's I would say the default. SDR first, yep. ISR second.
So let's move on to some sales enablement and specialization, right? Because I know and what I'd love to focus on a little bit is stuff getting stuck in the funnel, right? I see it all the time. You probably get this. We need our reps to do better closing. Well, oftentimes it's not that they are bad at closing, it's that they suck at discovery, right? They're just not good at that part of it, right? Sometimes they're
lead qualification, yeah. Yep.
Right. So talk about sales enablement as sales specialization at the SDR role, the AE role, customer success, or account manager. Like, what's your take on that these days?
Well, one thing is when you have, again, niches and there's more roles and there's more content being created, there's this general trend of overwhelm across everything, right? So customers are more overwhelmed by more everything. Reps are more overwhelmed by more tools and more stuff, more responsibilities. That's one reason specialization works. It simplifies things for people. It's like a counter to the overwhelm. That's why nail a niche works. It's a counter. It's a focusing. It helps you focus through the overwhelm and for the prospect. So anything you can do to help salespeople or reps or whoever they are sort of know what should I be doing at this point with what tool and what kind of message to not have to there's sort of search through everything and figure everything out from scratch every time, the better it is, right? Trying to keep them simpler and more focused. Like, it's never going to be simple. Like, Salesforce.com or whatever CRM you use, you're always going to have field. It's not feature creep, it's field creep, right? There's that. It's easy to add fields. It's hard to take them away. It's just like a product. Yeah. It's easy to add features, hard to take them away. It's easy to add content. It's hard to go back and determine like what's the best content, what to use. So again, anything you can do to help salespeople focus and simplify their days, their weeks, what to do is going to be, and then really I think that's a lot of what sales enablement does when you do it the right way. It's not just adding more tools or things they can do, but how do you make it easier for salespeople to do what they need to do?
Right. And so when you talk about sales enablement, we were talking earlier about having, a sales coach and a sales manager, yes, some of that is quote unquote the book learning of sales enablement, right? Just having more of the repetitive process written down. But how do you see sales enablement and sales coaching really sort of starting to work more and more together these days? Because I'm starting to see that in the space. Are you seeing that?
Yeah, I think just people find sales enablement. I think it's a general term that people don't always like to think about. It's thrown around.
Right. I think it means for me, at least in the context of the question I asked, it was around, making sure those reps, whether they're ISRs or BDRs, are getting the positive feedback they need to get better. Right. Sales enablement for me is about getting better at their craft, depending on what part of the funnel they're in. And yes, it involves a process, but it's more about just teaching them the blocking and tackling.
Yeah, so I think the way I think about it too is similar, which is, the best reps, they just need to know more. They need to be more adaptable in their conversations. They need to be able to have those business conversations. I think in the past, sales could be more prescribed. We do step one, we do step two, we show them this, and then either they're going to buy or not, then we negotiate. Right. And to buyers aren't more educated. So there's actually the next book I'm working on with a partner, Ali Mears, is called Predictable Closing. And his big thing is, and I agree, which is, in general, buyers aren't more educated, they're more overwhelmed, they're more confused. And there are exceptions, but really, there's just too much information. And it's easy for salespeople to be the same way, especially if you get to a bigger company where you have more and more content, more and more types of customers. And how, on the coaching side, how do you, again, like, well, it's nail a niche or specialization, sort of structure things. So the container, it's almost like, the specialization is almost like the container people are in. Almost, or like, helps like box things off for them so they have a more finite place to get to be great at something. Right? And you're in prospecting or you're in closing. So that's one step. And then with like nail a niche, where are you focusing within there? But coaching is how do they understand those customers and where should they focus and how do they manage their time and how do they cut through the overwhelm? While with sales enablement, I think, again, makes it easier where who has not struggled with, all right, I want to share some content with this prospect, or I want to create a proposal that includes certain content, or I want to take what I've learned and really adapt our materials or the information I'm going to share so it really fits them. So I know Savo is one of the sponsors that sponsor this, like some stuff that Savo does. And those tools are so important to complement the coaching. So like you can tell people, hey, you should manage your time, but unless you give them the tools, it's just too hard. You can tell them, hey, you should share the right information with the right prospect at the right time. But unless you have the tools with like your Salesforce.com or sort of content discovery or other ways to sort through all the clutter, it's too hard for them to do it. So it's like enabling the coaches know what they need to do and to help them teach them what they need to do, but the tools are going to make it easier for them to execute, which is kind of a jargony word, but just basically do what they need to do. I mean, every salesperson, I'm the same way. Like, there's just a lot of busy work you need to do, whether it's not just even logging stuff, but like finding stuff. There's so much stuff. There's in Google Docs. It's in, I have my personal Google Docs. I got predictable revenue Google Docs. I got my files. It's just stuff. That's even just one problem, like finding it.
You got 9 kids of stuff in your house.
Yeah, that's a whole other story.
Yeah. What mistakes are you seeing with outbound prospecting from these teams, from these organizations you're working with today? You're still seeing outbound prospecting mistakes. Are they going too fast? Are they going too soon? Are they hiring up too quick? What do you see?
Yeah, it runs the gamut. So again, most of the companies, so the big companies are their own beast, and like an SAP Oracle, they just have, it's so complicated there that the problem is it's just complexity is impossible to deal with in a way. But for most of the regular companies we work with, it's a totally separate issue, which is you often have, and most of our companies are ones newer to outbound. We help people build successful outbound programs. So they might know about it, but they want help doing it right the first time. Or they don't want to, they're not ready to build their own team yet. Like your own team doing it is really your long-term solution. But a lot of companies don't want to do that yet, or they're not ready to. They don't have the confidence in hiring someone. There's lots of reasons why, and we prospect for them until they're ready to do it themselves. But the mistakes people make often would be, there's a lot, but the wrong expectations, right? They think, okay, within 30 days we'll be getting qualified appointments. Or it might take 3 months to get revenue coming in, that's just not the case. That's probably a really common one. Again, it takes 4 to 6 months to build a program, whether it's external or internal, into the point where, and this is like on average, but where it's consistently generating quality results. And it could take that plus an average sales cycle to see recurring revenue from that. So if you have a 4-month sales cycle, it could be 8 to 12 months to see recurring revenue. Another one is just getting the wrong people or not having someone really focused on it internally. So it's sort of like this. It's just like a project they're not really committed to. It's this thing they do here and there, whether they hire an intern to do prospecting for them or whether they have a sales manager doing it, just part-time, like, this thing I'll get done. Like anything else, if it's important to the company, you got to make it important, and it's not just outbound. And the third one is if you actually have, here's one that's really around teams that have a team in place and it's working. It's surprisingly hard to get an accurate outbound dashboard together that accurately reflects the true return on the true ROI, which means how much revenue is this outbound team really generating. So here's why. You don't really see this problem again until you get a little bigger. But this is but Salesforce, you know, as I saw this in other companies, is how do you prove? So first of all, getting the outbound dashboard accurate can be tricky in terms of them using it, getting data in, and so on. But how do you prove to the executives that all this revenue is incremental? So what happens is the more successful you are as a company, the more gray areas you run into where you have inbound leads coming in from accounts that you're prospecting to. So I'm prospecting to Target, and then a lead comes in inbound through the website. Was that outbound or inbound? Sometimes it's sparked by the prospector where they don't respond to the prospector, they just hit the website. Sometimes it's not. So how do you figure that out? So you need things like an audit process and attribution rules and so on. So that's, I think, probably one of the biggest issues I see with companies with successful teams is the revenue that the outbound team is claiming is not actually correct. And
yeah, I see that a lot too. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I'm the CEO, I need to know how much is inbound generating versus outbound to know. You need like a Chinese wall. You got to avoid the gray areas or else you don't know what you're getting back on your investments.
Right. No, this was great. So someone was commenting that it was the marketing team on that inbound lead. So I think there's a lot of salespeople who might disagree with you, Jeffrey.
By the way, the answer is you never really know. So you can go back and things like Salesforce help you audit. One more quick story is because, when I built the team at Salesforce.com, every once in a while, and we were generating half of the biggest deals. So my outbound team was generating half of the biggest deals every month that Salesforce closed. Then once in a while, Mark would email me because there'd be some deal, and I think like Penske might have been one early days. He says, well, hey, a partner is claiming credit for this. So why are you claiming credit? And, first I have a bit of a panic. First of all, Mark was always a skeptic because at Oracle, what he saw was inside salespeople basically shuffling papers for field salespeople and claiming credit and deals for what they didn't really do. They were just moving things around, like taking inbound leads and calling it outbound and so on. So he was a skeptic. But because in Salesforce we always audited, we had a trail, logged everything, and every opportunity that got approved for comp and sort of like counted towards results, I had checked and audited to make sure, where did it come from? Were there notes in there? Was it outbound? Was it, if it was if Mark asked you, did you source this deal? If you can't say yes, we shouldn't claim credit for it. So every time I got that email from Mark, but we never had a problem in justifying, yes, this is truly incremental revenue from outbound. So that's the kind of thing where you never really know truly until you actually talk to the prospect and ask them where they found you. Sometimes they know, some they don't, but it gets harder. That is a big issue, rules of engagement, as you get bigger and more successful.
So are you the creator of the statement then, that if it's not in Salesforce, it didn't happen? Is that you? Do we credit that back to you and Mr. Beniel?
I don't. I probably not. I probably heard that at Salesforce and just repeat it because if it's not in Salesforce, it doesn't exist. I mean, yeah, you have that. Yeah. It has to be a practice. You don't get paid if it's not in there. You don't get paid. If it's not there, you don't get credit.
So, yeah, I know we've reached the end of the hour, and this has been fascinating. I know there are a couple more questions we didn't get to, and I apologize to the audience. But Aaron, I don't know if you want to pop up your books again. If people don't know, it's Predictable Revenue and From Impossible to Inevitable. I know they're both on Amazon. I don't know if there's an audio version yet on any of those.
Both, yeah, audio.
Both. Okay. So there's audio versions. So if you've got a heavy commute, those are good times to do those things. But Aaron, thank you so much. If people do want to get in touch with you or want to talk to you about what Predictable Revenue does at your organization to help build outbounds, like where can they go do that? Where can they get a hold of you guys?
Yeah, just predictablerevenue.com. It's very simple. So
Great.
that's the main place. And then FromImpossible.com is really the book. It's a book site where you can get that free nail a niche chapter, and it has links to, it's on Amazon and Audible. Oops, sorry. But yeah, from PredictableRevenue.com for things like consulting or training or outsourcing, but FromImpossible.com for the book. I would highly recommend that you at least read that first chapter, Nail and Niche, because it'll change your life if you are in that zone.
Got it. By the way, just out of curiosity, if I'm brand new and I don't know Aaron Ross yet, which book do I read first?
From Impossible to Inevitable, yeah. That's the starter book.
Great.
And Predictable Revenue is more the diving into the sales side afterwards.
Okay.
But yeah, From Impossible.
Great.
And then again, I did that with Jason Lemkin, who is the founder of SaaStr. And if you don't follow him, you should.
Yeah, he's really, really smart. He also founded this little company that was bought by Adobe, I think, right? You know,
that one.
EchoSign. Yeah, he's done well for himself as well. Well, Aaron, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to see you and chat with you, and thanks for joining us. And I know our audience really enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, thanks, Richard, and thanks everyone here on the Sales Hacker team and Savo team.
Yeah, and by the way, yes, big thanks to Savo for supporting this and making this happen today. Thanks, Savo. We appreciate it. Bye, Aaron.
Bye, Richard.